The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, welcoming you to the 9th of our compilation videos containing evaluations for website subscribers in the 2022 Orchestration Challenge. Starting off with Vanessa's score, and Vanessa, it's great to get a score from you, and you probably already know what I'm going to say, right? You're probably going to be thinking, oh, Thomas is going to comment on, not using up arrow rolls. Just use a roll that goes across everything. Like if it's intended to roll all the way across the harp, then start at the bottom and have the roll line go all the way to the top. Don't use the up arrow unless you have down arrows to contrast them with, right? Otherwise, just use the standard roll. That's what it means. Everybody knows it. You don't need to get fancy, all right? You probably are also thinking, oh, Thomas is going to comment on me slurring across, like using these piano-style slurs, instead of just having just figuring out what would be a more natural kind of a slur for my wins. All that stuff aside, cool score, Vanessa. If there's any way for you to get a hold of Note Performer, and if it works with the application that you are using, then absolutely use it. Because, some of that, you can hear in the mock-up some of that kind of the way that your sound set is using kind of a mechanical sounding vibrato on some pitches and so on. So, Note Performer doesn't do that so much. Alrighty, so all that other stuff out of the way, let's just see what you've got, okay? And we'll just sort of judge it on its own merits. All right. So, the first issue is always is there, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? It does. It's really nice the way that you contrast this opening section going to the flutes and oboes, or the flute and oboes. I'm assuming this is a single flute. It's not marked, but, probably the same approach as before. And then the way you bring back all the winds, and you've got some harp rolls in here, and then you're adding just one little note on your first horn and so on. I think that's all really beautifully effective. So, let's just discuss each section and and how it's working and everything else. So here we're cutting out, you're cutting out the lower B, right? You just have the top note of the original piano octave and the clarinet's below, and that's kind of nice. You're giving it a little bit of space in the middle. You could easily have dropped in the English horn, and a lot of people actually elected to do that, first oboe on top, English horn in the middle, and then the clarinets below, which also works. But I think the sense of space also works nicely. And then you're bringing in your clarinet to sort of play those sort of suspended tones, and sort of take that little added pitch that gets stuck in there. And I think that works really nicely too. Okay. So to kind of get back into this whole question of slurring over repeated notes and just using the piano slurs, just try to avoid that, right? Just think what would be the natural kind of breathing? What would, where do you want the emphasis? Do you really want an opening like this that has almost no articulation on the downbeat, right? It's like this, by the way that you're slurring this, wow, really hugely long slurs here. We don't have any, just except for at the very beginning, we have articulation on the downbeat. Ta. Do you really want to do or do you want to go ta ta? Do you really want to go ta on every single bar? Ta ta. Right? So there's and then what is meant here? Is this meant to be playing kind of legato repeated notes? Is it meant like a portato kind of a thing? Would you actually, when all is said and done, would you actually prefer that this were really, really nicely articulated with just very, very clear dotted rhythm? Ta 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 ta, right? As opposed to ta, which is the way that you got it. It's just there's almost no crispness to the rhythm in here, right? Which is something that the winds are so good at, right? Right. And then with this little back and forth right in here, the slurs is just so long, it's kind of getting lost in what is the shape, what is the trade-off between the parts. So, so those are just some of the problems. But then flute over oboes is such a great idea, right? And it's just, at a place where the music becomes a little more complex in the piano part, you're simplifying it even further. You're forcing it to not get to be too intense. Well, it's just very good. And then, once again, I'm assuming this is first flute only. So first flute, English horn, sort of playing their octaves together. And then we also have clarinets and oboes kind of filling in the middle. And then this just is really wonderful, the way that it's kind of dissipating. Now, having the ties, having this tied instead of just a nice long dotted whole note, it's perfectly fine to have a dotted whole note in 6/4 time. But, seeing as how you're saying, well, I want a diminuendo from the middle of the bar, right? I want the diminuendo to end in the middle of the bar in some of these. So, that's acceptable then. But, don't feel that you have to, have tied dotted half notes just because they're in the score, right? So what was in the score was the tied dotted half notes were more for the context of the phrasing in the piano part, right? So that the pianist could be keeping track of where the part was under the held note, so that they wouldn't go of it or its context wouldn't be lost. But there's absolutely no need for that, except for to say, oh well, I want a diminuendo from or to the middle of the bar and to be absolutely clear about it. So that's the one exception. Otherwise, it should always be a dotted whole note tying forwards or ending or whatever. Okay. But, as far as all the balance issues and everything is concerned, I feel is really beautifully handled. It's really nicely done. You could have put a slur over this. This could have lasted, like, these could have been dotted whole notes. For all that matters. Yeah, and then just nice ending here. Mezzo piano crescendo, diminuendo. Diminuendo to what? What is the dynamic here at the end? Here you have pianissimo in your first horn. Totally doable. So is everybody else pianissimo? Or are they piano? What's going on here? All right, you gotta work that out. This doesn't have to be a split bar with your rests. It could just be a standard old whole rest with a fermata over it. Okay, so now this next page, things are starting to take off a little bit. I like this nice little dovetailing in between the parts. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're doing here with the slurring, just trying to make it kind of more natural. It's like I don't have any big objections there. I think it's going to flow really beautifully. And, you don't, like, even though it looks like the phrases are sort of interrupted, they're not really, because it's all one continuous line that's dovetailing one into the other and into the other and so on. I just think that's really strong scoring. And then here you've got pretty much a transcription of the upper two staves of the piano part. La Melodia ben cantando. Yeah, I think that all works great. There's really no need for you to have separate stems for this part. I mean, it's if every pitch is the same duration, right, and they're all working together and slurring in the same way and phrasing in the same way and everything else, they might as well just be octaves connected by one stem, right? It's sort of gilding the lily to add the extra, to have two voices with opposite stems and so on. It's just really kind of no need for that. It's like one of the things why I'm suspecting this is Muse score is that, like, this sometimes there are, like, the staff lines or the bar lines do not agree with the brackets and so on. So this should be one solid bar line across all the strings and so on. Oh, you probably know that. Yeah, and then here when the harp comes in, the harp could definitely, like, there's no need for it to cut off here unless you really feel that it shouldn't match the strings. I don't know why it wouldn't. Just have them connect, tie forward to dotted quarter notes here, right? It's just really such a cool score. And then here you're opening up flute, clarinets, and then a little bit of horn, right? Yeah, and I just really love how smooth this all comes together, and then adding oboe, English horn, bassoon. So two bassoons, I guess, with the separate stems. It's strange. It's like the stem going the wrong direction in your flute parts. That happened on the first page too, right? That was kind of weird. Anyway, I don't know why that is. But once again here, like, these could all be intervals with the same stem, right? It's just easier to read. Easier for the score reader, for the conductor. Maybe it's easier to extract for your copyist, right? But look, right in here, you got, like, these big tenths right in here. And your bassoons on the same stem. So, I mean, if this is what's going on in your bassoons, it should be happening to everybody that has a similar kind of scoring. Yeah, and this is cool right in here. The way the bassoons are coming in to support the cellos and so on. Yeah, I mean, it's just really nice. I mean, I don't have huge objections to anything in this. About the only thing that I would say to caution about is just how grounded this long D is, right? At mezzo piano. I would almost be tempted to mark it pianissimo, right? And just have it sort of hovering below everything. And then as the music started to increase, everybody pushing to forte here, maybe it could increase to like maybe mezzo forte. Right? And then this could be forte. Just to kind of keep it from being too stodgy. Do you know what I mean? To keep it from being too heavy. Because this is sort of light, it's like the river is flowing, right? Like the birds are flying, right? The scenery is opening out before the sunrise, right? So I feel that, and then like the joy is coming through, like of being in that place and being a part of it and so on. Here, I think there's like zero need for for your timpani note to be tied here, right? Just have a single eighth note with an accent on it, and then just leave an eighth rest and then a 16th rest and then ba-bum, right? I think that would work a lot better right in here. All right, well, ultra cool score, Vanessa, and just so great that you are a part of this challenge this year, and that you're contributing this, and that it's just really cool. It shows a lot of, I just would have been interesting to see what you did with section B, or section C. So really, I hugely appreciate your participation in the challenge this year, and would really love to see what you do next year with, which is going to be completely different. This is going to be about as different from our general trend, if there is a general trend in our scores, as we have had so far. So anyway, look out for that. And now let's look at the next score in this compilation. Great work, Luke. Once again, like, you keep sending me scores, and like your improvement each time is just fantastic. And and I just felt this score had such a beautiful character to it, and just wonderful simplicity to it as well. It all works, right? Like, what doesn't work, right? It all works great. Like, I love this whole idea of like pizzicato with the harp going forward, the harp beautifully audible. There's nothing in here that is interfering with it. The harp isn't, the horn and the timpani are not like blasting over the harp. It's all really, really good. One thing I would do is just like add like a slur over this. Would be very, very cool. Oops. Let's go back a little. Cross staff slurs in Sibelius are just insane, aren't they? But, something like this would be really, really great. That's what the harpist needs. Sibelius, anybody out there works for Sibelius, you need to get that straightened out. It's how many years has it been? 22 since I started using Sibelius. And, cross-staff slurs, certain cross-staff lines and so on have not been solved yet. And it just would really help a lot. All right, so moving on to just the scoring to see, how it works, what works. I really love the idea of just really simple flute and clarinet and octaves, like at a soft dynamic, here pushing, you're going to feel some overtones getting a little fierce from the clarinet and coloring the flute in a slightly edgy way. Not bad, but just be a little edgy. But just starting off, soft dynamics from everybody, bassoons and so on. I think this all works great. And then, just as I sort of imagine in my criteria, there is a shift of color here, a shift of emphasis, right? And you set it up really, really nicely. Right, with the horn coming in here, taking over for the bassoons, and just in a really subtle, gradual way. So nicely done. Just a couple of strokes or 3 strokes on the timpani. And then at that point, the oboe comes in. If you really want this, it is possible to fade in. Like you could fade in with your oboe and fade out with your flutes, right? So, or your flute. You could have started like here, piano, diminuendo, and then you could have come in like with a triple P oboe crescendo to the middle of the bar, right? Or to the next part of the bar. It's if you just really wanted a subtle handoff. But this works fine too. The way that you got it, the oboe kind of starts a bit obviously, is all I would say. And then this is really lovely. So like since you took a break with the bassoons and went to the horns, when the bassoons come back in, solely, they really sound like fresh, right? It's just really, once again, really some subtle scoring and simple scoring. And then, little nuances here and there, and the music is really well taken, da 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 da, and so on. And then the nice conversation between the two elements. You did not slur over repeated notes. You could take the slur a little further, though, if you wanted to. That's about the only thing that I would say is, like, do you really want those slurs? Do you need those slurs? Do you really need to go da every single time? Right? Or would it be better just to go ta ta? Do you see what I'm saying? Anyways, but I like this in here. Ta ta ta. Yeah, it's just beautiful and simple, and the articulation on the downbeat helps the pizzicato, helps the emphasis of the pizzicato, and then the flowing harp. I mean, it's just really well done. And then like the horns coming in here, da 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 da. It's just a nice support. And then this ba 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 ba. About the only concern here would be like at how high the flute is. With the, like once again taking taking a position over the clarinets. But I mean, but it's still all fine. Yeah, that all works for me fine. And then the little roll at the end with the timpani. Interesting how many people felt that roll, and which is fine. Like I don't have a problem with a lot of people taking the same approach. A lot of people did very similar things to what I did, and I think that it's just a question of us hearing the same things when we approach a score. So here the music opens out really beautifully. I don't think you really need to do this, trading off the first clarinetist for the second clarinetist or whatever. This could all be taken by the second clarinetist or the first clarinetist, one or the other. It's the kind of thing where this is like really kind of a more accompaniment part, right? So these could both just be second players, right? Second bassoon and second clarinet, and then that sort of saves up the bassoonist and the clarinetist to lead these there's da bum da 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 dum ba da da dum. You know what I mean? It can be more. They can just focus more on the melody when they get to it. Of course, if you're keeping your orchestral numbers down, right, and that's very cool. Just kind of. Just a question of whether or not like the having doubled your strings up to this point whether or not they need further doubling going forwards, right? So if you had if you didn't feel that you really needed to go A2 here in your flutes and oboes, some of those parts could have been sharing what's going on in the clarinets, and the clarinets could have been continuing to support the violas and so on. I mean, so there's a lot of options in here if you want to keep the strength going in those middle strings, but at the same time, like just pushing forward with the dynamic in the middle strings is enough to bring up their strength without having to double them, right? See, so it's like, so you just got a unique color in here. Yeah, it made the strings a little firmer, but it's more about color, right? And then here, when you're going to these, kind of stacks of middle voice kinds of things, then the strings can really handle themselves. It was kind of interesting right in here. The pizzicato in the and like the nice long sound, of course imitating the sound of a sustained piano, right? And then just like riding this D. So we just really see the context on both pages of the original approach, the original harmonic intention, which I think is very cool. I love the dovetailing that you built into this, like trading off on the A. Right, I think that works really great, and nice, like it's cool that you didn't have to have the bassoon play the low D and whatever. It's just enough for the cello to do it, right? And the cello, of course, is playing off the divisi players and so on. Yeah, and then as to the treatment of the melody, horns on the harmony. First and second violins playing octaves, and then the octaves continuing onwards, like as we're slowly introducing, like first flute and first oboe halfway through, A2, as we said before, A2 if you prefer. And then as that becomes more and more pronounced and louder and stronger, like we're adding clarinets, and on top of bassoons, the clarinets essentially, playing like in octaves with the bassoons, and then things getting more intense as the horns chip in and so on. So yeah, so I mean, I would say it's really nicely orchestrated. There's like I have pretty much zero problems with this. Just question of whether there were, was there any role that the timpani and the harp could have played? If there's not, then don't worry about it. Could the harp have just rolled a nice big fat chord here, or could there have been a timpani stroke somewhere? I don't really see it with the way that with the approach that you took. But the only thing that I would say is that, could you have had a bigger orchestra, right? And I actually I really like the idea that you really limited yourself to, double winds, two horns, timpani and harp, right? Plus your strings. I mean, like, just with that limited palette, you got a lot of color and a lot of life, and I feel a lot of sincerity, right? It just really felt like something that would have gone down well. Right, that something that maybe Barvinsky would have kind of agreed with, like sort of say, oh yeah, that's one way of, that might be true to my idea. And of course I cannot know what he would have felt, and of course it probably changed at different stages of his life, right? He might have been interested to hear how people would orchestrate his piece at one stage, and he might have dreaded it at others, right? You just really can't know. But he seemed to have been just the coolest, nicest guy, and didn't deserve what happened to him. So, anyways, just really great effort, Luke, as usual. And just like now, I'm thinking about all the scores that you've sent me, and just thinking about how would you approach the next session score, which is going to be so different, and it's going to have so many traps and challenges, and it'll be the kind of thing where you cannot take this approach, like the things that the approaches that seem to speak to us in common ways, that will be something that possibly isn't possible, right? Like the score may have to be rewritten to a great extent in order for it to work for orchestral instruments. And that's just another little hint there. So I will leave you thinking about that. And thank you so much, Luke, for your contribution. Just like looking at this one and Vanessa's and so on, it's just giving me so much energy and, just the kind of thing that I need to finish off the remaining half of these um, orchestration challenge evaluations. Just so enjoyable. And speaking of which, the next score is pretty cool too, so let's go take a look at it now. Wow, George. Now that score is really something. There's so many cool things about this. I just love the incredible delicacy of this scoring. Alrighty, so I mean, this is so fun. Like, all of the way that you interpreted the melody in, with all natural harmonics. It's such a cool idea. And of course, like you had to change it to F major in order for that to work. There are a few things, like would they work? They're a little problematic. Like one thing is right in here, you've got a muted first horn playing softly or playing piano, and you're playing an octave below the piccolo, right? So this piccolo is actually sounding A up here, and then the horn part would be sounding like this if this were concert pitch, right? So it's basically you've got your octave there, and then you've got it doubled by these other instruments and so on. Okay, all right. Okay, so it could work. There are some problems though. Okay, now I don't know how much you read, or if you did reading when you read up on certain natural harmonics, alternate natural harmonics, like touch 5 and so on, which I had a chapter recently. I don't know if you kind of did some of the reading which, basically reveals that touch 5 intervals are kind of weak, like compared to touch 4 intervals. Even in natural harmonics, right? Like this being an open string. But I mean, it could work. So, I'm not saying, this is all wrong, George, and forget about it. I am saying use caution. And, if this were something that you were to follow up on and score the entire thing and try to get it performed and so on, just really be open to the players suggesting that you possibly change these to all touch 4 intervals. Because, I mean, it really, it wouldn't be too hard until you got to this G, like when you have absolutely no other choice in order to bring the pitch down, right? The touch 5 intervals are a really great way of like reducing the distance, right? But I mean, it's one of the situations where you might as well just do the harmonic on the open D string, right? Just like do an octave harmonic. So I mean, I think that would probably work better. So yeah. Anyhow, yeah, it's very trippy. It just really brings up a lot of different points. And this is really interesting. This you have trills here on half steps. On here you have a trill on an F, and here you have a trill on an E. Sul tasto and sul ponticello. I mean, what a cool idea, right? And just really, like niente level timpani rolls right in here, triple P. It's kind of interesting, very timely, as I just wrote those tips, just posted those tips on orchestrationonline.com about extreme dynamics. And pretty much what you've written in here adds, it lines up with the approach that I recommend. It could be interpreted in the way that I recommend people think about those dynamics. All right. Well, it's all great, but like I think that your biggest problem here will be the first horn absorbing the piccolo part, especially when it goes to this high written G, right? Like you're saying piano. Okay, that's great. Well, a horn player can play piano, but like when they get up into this register, it'll have more like of a it could have a piano dynamic in terms of like how much it pushes like a VU meter or whatever, or maybe like a digital meter, but in terms of penetration and projection, it might be much stronger, right? So like you could get a soft sound but a much stronger projection, in which case goodbye piccolo. And in fact, the piccolo is really going to have a difficult problem projecting here over the horn anyway if they're both soft, right? So like I think the best, like if you really want this to work, the first horn would have to be pianissimo. And I think even the second horn when it comes in here. Right, by the way, like if you're going to have a situation like this where you have like two voices, like and the second voice is obviously marked with a rest, then you need to put the dynamic up here, okay? And then you put the entrance dynamic here. So, let's assume that that is also piano, right? That just makes much more sense. Of course, you don't have to do that when the instruments are sharing a stem and so on, but yeah. Yeah, 3 bassoons. It's kind of cool. I mean, yeah, so let's just go over each passage and check out the scoring as we go through. Like I won't just sit here and admire your your cool ideas. All right, so here we've got the octaves scored out in natural harmonics for our upper strings. Pretty much all playing the same open strings on the viola, of course, having the same open strings as the first and second violins, except for their top E. And yeah, and then you've got like that is all doubling at various positions. What is going on in the flute part, right? So this D touch 5 is going to sound an octave higher, right? So it'll be the same pitch as the piccolo. So you might think, oh well, like there's all the weight of these soft violins and viola playing along with the piccolo, so that's probably enough to balance with the horns, right? No, the horn needs to come down. I would recommend pianissimo here. All right. And I mean, and you seem to be aware of that, right? You have pianissimo, or excuse me, you have piano tremolos here, and then like you're coming in with your third horn, and you want him or them to be pianissimo or triple P. So like you seem to be aware that there is a problem balancing certain things, and so I don't get it. Why is the first horn louder? Maybe because you see it as like a melody instrument, but it's still it. I mean, I would bring it down. I just would bring it down because its overtones will be enough to swamp anything, right? Especially when it goes up to this G. And I would also make this nice long held A sounding D, and then this sounding C. I would make those also really soft, like pianissimo or triple P. Maybe you don't need to go all the way down to triple P. This is just really lovely right in here. The harp and the pizzicato working together. The double bass is not going to overwhelm the harp just because, the character of the instruments and so on. But if there are ways of making the harp a little bit bigger in terms, like you could add a third octave on top of this, rather than just having the single octave. Just add one more pitch above. All right. Yeah. Okay. And then just like a little bit of underlining from above, overlining of the of how the melody reaches upwards, and then leading to that sol tasto / sol ponticello tremolo. Trill. It's such a cool idea, and then the clarinets finishing up the doubling. So it's just really beautifully sensitive, right? Then right in here you say warmly, right? So the place to put that, the place to put this text is here, okay? Yeah, it's not technique text, it's expression text, right? You're telling the player how, what way to express themselves warmly, right? And I almost suggest that they should be playing mezzo forte, right, which is a warmer dynamic. So, what do you mean by slurring across a repeated note, right? I mean, are you aware that when you do that, you are telling the player to either have some sort of portato kind of an approach, or like a legato that's very, very soft, which is fine, but like you are dulling the precision of this 16th note. You lose the da 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 da. You just have so you really have, like, you can hear it on the mock-up too. It's like barely getting any kind of kind of sound out of this. And and also, like, you were going along really nicely with some of this, bum 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 bum, right? With some things slurring across, but like for a lot of places, you are using bits and pieces of piano style slurs, right? Which is one of the things I ask people to not do in the 12 common scoring errors, right? Don't just reuse piano slurs, right? Because, like, with this, like, where is the articulation on the downbeat anywhere? Is there any articulation on the downbeat? You don't want people to raise their hands during rehearsal and say, hey, is anybody playing the downbeat? Is anybody bowing on the downbeat at bar 8? Right? You don't want that kind of situation where everything is so sloshy, right? There's almost no sense of punch or push or pulse or anything where it's needed. All right, so I just say really watch out. Now, the qualifier is in this kind of scoring where everything is incredibly delicate. Maybe you do want that, but I just feel like, especially slurring over like a dotted rhythm, right? Dotted repeated notes. It's like, that's the thing. It's like, I think that's the thing that is really kind of hitching me up so much about this. Not so much that it's just dropping the piano slur onto the winds and the strings without thinking about it, maybe. And maybe not really having a plan for what that exactly sounds like, whether it is a very smooth legato or portato or whatever it is. But the fact that it's happening over repeated notes on a dotted rhythm, and the result is that the dotted rhythm just ends up losing any kind of shape, right? And we don't have that lovely kind of wonderful Slavic kind of da ya ba ba bum, that's just a wonderful, just the way that things are there's just that kind of little kick, right? That we see in Chopin and Borodin, and like a lot of the great composers of Eastern Europe, right? So, like, just really, really think about slurring over repeated dotted notes, or repeated dotted rhythm. Okay, all right, I'll get off my soapbox now, but it's just I feel that this did not need to be slurred at all, right? This part here, this is fine. This slur is great, but yeah. Yeah, but nice little interplay between the elements here. I love the flutes right in here and the English horn working together. Certainly cool. And then the flugelhorn. You know, it's it's I mean, it more or less works. More or less works. And then here you've got your bassoons and first horn coming in and working together. And I think that this is like my favorite part. I mean, no offense to this section in here and all the delicate stuff. I just love the bassoons in here and the way that you've got it scored. I don't know why the third bassoon. I mean, I guess you're thinking, oh well, the second is going to be the middle voice here, so I might as well have the first and the third work together walking down. But I would say it's actually better to have the first and the second walking down together because it's whatever is matching the motion of the first, right? Is the player, the player sitting next to them. It's more essential. It's fine for the third to do the voice crossing here, right? It's actually better, I would say. So first and second on the top, third on the bottom, and then second and third, and then you don't even need these numbers at all if you just stay to a kind of a standard. If you stay to a kind of a standard vertical scoring, yeah, this is nice. Yep, and then you have this kind of sweeping upward kind of a thing. It's funny. It's like it's almost too slow for a glissando. It's like a there can. Okay, so like one of the cool things about harp is that an incredibly soft dynamics. Their fingertips can brush across the strings just with the most delicate, slow glissando. But when you start to get a little bit louder, right? Like especially into a crescendo, then that slow glissando starts to kind of like not. It's just sort of starts to sound like ding 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 ding. Do you know what I mean? Or you might as well just be going pluck 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 like a scale, like just 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. One being the thumb and four being the ring finger, right? Just kind of walking up, or 4 3 2 1 4 3 2 1 if we're talking about going uphill. So yeah, in that case, like scales in octaves, right? It's not the funnest thing. So yeah, but I mean, just considering how delicate everything is, what if you were to start from a pianissimo, right? Just everybody starts from a pianissimo, and then you just have like just kind of this breathy, brushed, just ultra soft glissando going up. And what if there was no crescendo, right? Just like the instruments were just really gently playing, and then right at the end, just a little crescendo into the next bar, right? And that way you just get this beautiful haunting whisper. Yeah. Right, so, about the only thing that kind of is the fly in the ointment here is that you got like tripled flutes right in here, and they're playing in very close proximity to parts around them. Like you have a pianissimo sounding A above them, and sounding G doubling with them. And I'm not seeing any crescendo or anything to bring it up to mezzo forte and give it any kind of fighting chance. I mean, like you're already covering that pitch with, with your first bassoon, right? It really feels more to me like a clarinet part, in all honesty. It just really feels more clarinet-like. Maybe this could be second clarinet and this could be first clarinet. And I mean, you throw the flutes in there just for fun, but like I just don't think with the horn over them, that they will really come through, because it's all about overtones and incredible gentleness and delicacy, right? So like here, this was risky enough. I mean, it is the softest part of this instrument that can be piercing, right? It's just the bottom 5 notes or 7 notes of the the piccolo are just so delicate. And then the same thing is true of all of your flutes here. Just really delicate. Now this will work out fine. But yeah, I mean, you might as well leave it in and see if it works if you get this performed. But I just would be very careful about scoring this with a horn on top, already doubling by bassoon, other notes in close proximity to it, and just like it isn't an uncomplicated sound picture. Like if you're gonna throw in flutes like this, uncomplicate the sound picture, right? That would be my advice. Yeah, and even at quadruple P, the timpani rolling underneath is also complicating the sound picture. Not to mention the sul ponticello trill here and the tremolo there. I mean, it's just a lot for the flutes to be working around, but maybe it'll work. I don't know. Oops. All right, so here, this is like a page out of Un Barque by Ravel, his orchestration that he had performed, and it sounds pretty good with a modern orchestra, but maybe it disappointed him in maybe the orchestra that played it wasn't that great, or maybe he just felt, oh, it's too similar to La Mer, it'll be compared to La Mer, I better not go forward with this. Yeah, I mean, imagine though if he had orchestrated all of Miroir, that would have been so incredible. All right, so this is it's just so fun. Oh, so nice. Yeah, so you know what, I think you need to think about bowing I think you need to think about bowing a little bit more. I would bow these beam groups separately, and then I would bow this together, this rise of an octave here. Right, so down, up, and then this could be all down because it's all just like the same thing, and then this could be up, right? That was just a much more sane, much more, I would say, much more usable, much more playable kind of an approach. And then the same thing here, this could all be down bow, up bow, especially like with a leap up, and then down bow, and then they could just go up at the end here, or they could slur across to the last one. But just try to keep it simple for them, especially if they're already playing divisi and in 3 and so on. And 4 against a 3, yeah. I mean, it's just so much like it really reminds me of Un Barque without being a slavish imitation or anything. It's just a lovely homage, I think, is what it feels like to me. Yeah, and then trading off these C's between viola and double bass, which is a wonderful combination, giving the the cellos a chance to play this along with the clarinets, which is a lovely idea, which is also itself trading off from bassoons. And then here the violas take over on much higher pitches, right? Sort of doubling with the harp and so on. And yeah, so I mean, just very, very cool idea. So the question though is, does it work? I'm a little hesitant. This is the kind of thing where it is so complex that in order for you to really get sufficient coaching from me, we would have to sit down with this score for a couple of hours, even just like this opening, because you have really added so much stuff to it. I mean, I love the idea of the shifting nuances, right? With some, you've got some things like muted strings and flutes and oboes and so on, kind of just continuing to play at mezzo forte going through. I think that's very cool. And then you have other elements like here, you've got your trombones pushing in and then receding outwards, and yeah. So, I mean, I cautiously approve of this, but I I think that it really will require a lot of focus. Probably the thing that is going to be the most problematic is your harp, right? You have so much stuff going on, and it doesn't matter that it's only at mezzo forte and that you have marked your harp at piano. That there is just it's just a matter of distraction, right? And a matter of so many different functions happening at once. But even just the addition of the harp and the heavy brass pushing up to mezzo dynamics here is just enough to make the harp go away, right? So like, and especially here, like where you really want this beautiful combination between the violas and the harp and so on. Like even were all of these instruments taken away and it was nothing but viola and harp, I would still mark the harp up to mezzo piano or mezzo forte against the violas. I would just try to be finessing that balance. Yeah, and then of course timpani is also going to help kill the harp too. So like, what kind of harp could come through here? More like doubling of what the violins are doing and the flutes are doing, right? That which is actually much more of a harp kind of a thing. Don't try to get them to do Bispigliando tremolos between chords. That won't come through. It's just too soft. But some kind of swooping from above would come through beautifully. The glockenspiel is going to be nice. I love the idea of the English horn and the flugelhorn playing unison, and then an octave below having high tuba. That's really nice. I mean, I almost feel like this could be like a euphonium part too, right? Just like with a really good euphonium player. One of the problems with euphonium and flugelhorn, for that matter, is a lot of times like you'll ask for it, and then in the orchestral context, like people will just say, well, why don't you just use a tuba and just a regular old B flat trumpet? I mean, it'll sound fine. You don't really need to have these extra weird instruments, and besides, euphoniums are just kind of like a joke and so on and so forth. So like they just have a bad attitude about a euphonium sometimes. Or, they just see it as a nuisance, right? There's something that one of the trombone players will do, maybe the third trombonist. And like a really great euphonium or a flugelhorn player from like a British brass band, is just incredible. It's like, it has a level of expression that is just amazing. And which is one of the, all the more reason why I was thinking like, oh, this would be a really good euphonium part, like with a really good euphonium player. But that attitude is not universal. Of like, a little disrespect for those band instruments, but it's like, there still is a tendency for an eye roll if you really insist that your lower brass orchestral players play youth. That will get some resistance, and some tuba players might just say, look, I could do that just as well. I can make it sound light, and I can make it sound nice and emotional if you want. If unless we're getting up into really high areas, and then there are some tuba players that can play high beautifully. Alrighty, so I really love the idea that the figuration in the piano has been adapted in ways that aren't locked into a dead-on transcription of what happened before, and that the lines are not always working together. In like they're not always doing exactly the same thing. A3 bassoons at piano. Like, it's just a very kind of a hoarse sound, right? It's a sort of a symphonie fantastique sound. Not so sure that that's exactly what a single bassoon player would, you'd have first bassoon on this and then second bassoon on this, you could divide up this between two different bassoons. You don't even need a third bassoonist until you get to there. But it's just really gorgeous, like, I would say like Ravel style scoring. So nice, and I love the trills in these oboes, and then just the way the music builds. It's just so cool. There are just so many layers to this. It's just so wonderful. Really nice work. And okay, so to all those people who I've been sort of scolding about not leaving a just a dotted whole note to cover the entire bar, and instead putting in dotted half notes that are tied. So here's an example of a justification of that, right? So here you have a mezzo forte diminuendo to piano right in the middle. Therefore, George needs to do the tie to a dotted half note, right? Rather than having just a full dotted whole note. It just makes more sense. So that's perfectly fine. But even at that, can you imagine having passages that have a lot of whole notes in them where a lot of them are like tied half notes, just so that you could do things like that. Like the players usually understand, if the diminuendo or crescendo marking just goes across half of a bar of a whole note, so long as the justification, the width of the measure isn't like incredibly narrow, they'll pretty much will understand what you mean. All right. So yeah, but just lovely first page, and then kind of going to this next one. So here you've got these slow glissandos, and I just think like for the effect that you're going for, you would be better off to add like another octave or two below, and just turn these into straight glissandos with lines rather than to make them into scales, right? Because like most of this scale will just get devoured by everything else because it's going so slow. The faster the harpist rips across the strings, the more of the sound comes through, right? But with these slower kinds of things, and especially like fortissimo, I mean, you have parts in your brass that are building towards forte. You've got winds and strings that are building towards fortissimo. Unless this is a big sweeping glissando, you're not going to hear any harp, right? And especially like here, when you get even lower, it's a lower slow glissando, even more devoured, right? As the brass are pushing towards mezzo forte here, and it just pick your moment with the harp, right? These moments are possibly not the right moments, but it really is wonderful. Just really lovely Ravel style scoring. Yeah, but like once again, it's so complex that we would need. I've already spoken about this score for about a half an hour now, so I better stop. But it's like, this level of complexity would really require some really intense coaching and so on. But I really appreciate that you brought this to me, George. I feel like this is it's almost like a gesture of appreciation. If it isn't, then pardon me for the presumption, but it almost feels like this is you talking back to me after having studied my videos on Ravel and so on. And it's a wonderful gesture if that is so. So thank you so much for that. But I think that like most of this will work, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be balanced and finessed and so on and so forth. Yeah. Yeah, but just, a lovely interpretation, adaptation of the original score, right? Which is, people were getting after me for adding one single harmony note, to turn Barvinsky's sixth chords into ninth chords, right? And look at this. This is adapting things so incredibly, like it's almost a different piece. You have elevated the level of adaptation so much, and I think it's just as valid, if not more, than my interpretation. So very cool. I wish that you could have done an entire score on this. Once again, I think I would still be flummoxed by the scope of what I would have to evaluate, but still, it's a really great effort, and my hat is off to you, and excellent work, man. All right, so let's just keep right on this, and not get too dazzled by this, because like the next scores that are coming up are also incredibly cool. So thank you, George. Let's take a look at the next one now. also a very nice, juicy score from Jason. Now, Jason, if you are in one of these orchestration challenges and you there are instruments that are in my template, or maybe you've made your own template or something like that, or you're using somebody else's template, and there are unused, like if there are unused instruments, like the things that you're not going to use here, in this case, like B-flat trumpets, trombones, tuba, and so on, then you can just get rid of them, and then it will relieve vertical space. Or, what you might have done is you could have put all of this on one page with the other blank instruments, and the lower strings, and then you could have had all of this on another screen, right? And then that would also be easier to read, larger staff size, right? It's more spread out. So just feel free to reformat things. I wish I had time or an assistant who could go through all the scores and reformat them to the perfect ideal screen size for me. But I'm pretty much a one-man operation on this, and I kind of like that. I kind of like just kind of working with myself and so on. Alrighty, so we're going to go through a few scoring questions on this, or scoring issues. And then we're going to work out the nitty gritty of the actual orchestration, right? So a few things like here you got a horn 1 and 3, 2 and 4, right? And you're putting the lower horn on the bottom. And something, there is absolutely nothing about your orchestration that really justifies changing the whole relationship, the normal relationship of the horns. Usually you see 1 and 3 scored together on the same staff when there is an extended section with both of those horns playing the same notes, or having a very close relationship, very high in the range of the horn, right? That is a typical example of scoring 1 and 3 together on the same staff. But since you don't have that, you just have a couple of chords and then just this little first horn solo or first horn part. You don't need that, and it's just kind of more confusing. Like the eye will go to it, and before the person has got a chance to read this, they might say, "Oh, look, he switched the order of the horns," and then they might look back and say, "Oh, right, look, he's done this 1, 3, 2, 4 thing." So seriously, this should be marked as an E fifth, and this G should be down here in the third horn part, and you can write 3 over that. And then then you can once again have an E third in the bass, in the lower staff, and an E fifth in the upper staff, right? It's just so much clearer to the average score reader. Look, you have to think, Jason, that the vast majority of concert orchestra parts, I'm just talking about from J.C. Bach, right, and his father Johann Sebastian and so on, or let's think more like J.C. Bach forwards, like the classical period, from J.C. Bach forwards, or let's say more like to the point where there were 4 F horns at all times, right? So let's say more like around the time of Tchaikovsky and earlier, going back to Grieg and just like the established, there's an established kind of an approach, right? And if you are changing that approach, you better darn well justify it with some massive high scoring for both 1 and 3. Otherwise, you are just, possibly falling into a trap. Look, I'll just tell you a quick anecdote, right? I mean, I had an approach like this in a score, and it was clearly marked 1 and 3, 2 and 4. And I actually had those parts clearly marked when there were solos and other things, right? And I handed it to a conductor, and he was working with it, and he got 1 or 2 things wrong in telling the horns what to do, and then during the rehearsal, or during the break during the rehearsal, he walked up to me. He said, is this right? You scored horns 1 and 3, 2 and 4 on these staves? And like I said, yeah. I said, well, I wish somebody had told me. And he walked off. It was like, well, I mean, it's in the score, right? But that's an example of like just like it put somebody out, it inconvenienced them for no reason, and it just made things confusing. So please, just do not do that. Do not do 1, 3, 2, 4 unless you've got a really good reason, right? There isn't enough of a good reason here. All right, I'm kind of blabbing about nothing here. All right, and then like some of these other things, like this, I wonder if this is MuseScore, because MuseScore does this a lot. It creates gaps in bar lines that should be solid, right? This should be one solid bar line covering 5 staves, for instance, right here, So, and then right in here, like you have parts that go on and on and on for many bars, and there are no rhythmic differences between the first voice and the second voice. They are all the same exact thing playing, say, in this case, an octave unison, right? So they might as well just be on one staff, like intervals, right? And I think the same thing is true for like these bassoon parts, right? Like, you don't really get into a place like very rarely do you have something like this with the second voice playing different rhythmic values than the first, right? So if they're the same rhythmic values all the way through, playing intervals or octaves or whatever, octaves are intervals, I know, then you might as well just have them all on the same stem in first voice, okay? So intervals in first voice is better than split voices in first and second voice, okay? It's just like there's kind of no good reason, right? Like this is better, right? Can you imagine if these were all three, if this were 3 different voices, right? So, I mean, better to have this approach than this approach. Of course, when you get into this, then, then that justifies it, and that's perfectly fine. But if you don't have things like that, right? There are 1 or 2 other things. Okay, so B-flat clarinet, right? I mean, maybe B-flat clarinet because the bass clarinet is also in B-flat, but I think that if you're going to have your, like, unless you have a real good justification for this to be a different tuning than the other standard clarinets, I would say it's fine to have an A clarinet to have 3 A clarinets, and then switch to a B-flat bass clarinet, right? It's perfectly fine, and it's easier on the score reader, right? To just like there are a couple of places, like for instance, in Mercury by Holst, since he has like opposing tonalities, he gives the ones that favor the sharp tonalities. He gives the little fragments of motive that are in the sharp tonalities to the A clarinet, and the flat tonalities to the B flat clarinet, right? So that's one example, and then there are other examples. I think Mahler or Strauss has got like something similar. All right, but like there's really kind of no justification here either, right? So I would say just keep them all together, because that way it's like easier for the score reader, the conductor, your main score reader, to look at this and just really quickly do the math in their head, right? Okay, so yeah, just stick with A. All right, so now we've talked about all those other things. There are a couple other issues, but I will cover them as we go forward. All right, so here we go with our A clarinets, which of course could have been written as octaves on the same stem. All right, and you've got your bassoons in the middle, which could have been written as intervals on the same stem. All right, so it is a very cool kind of an opening. I think it's really neat to have the clarinets and the bassoons working together, and the enclosure is all good because the A clarinets are nice and rich in their chalumeau register, and right at the place where the tenor register of the bassoon starts to become more delicate and less kind of less of a powerhouse, right? Okay, so that's all good. But did you notice something? What was the character of the piano part here? It was kind of light and sweet, maybe a little bittersweet, but not sad, right? But this is more tragic, right? And why is it tragic? Can you think about why that is, Jason? Okay, the reason why is that you have dropped the octaves down to enclose the thirds. In the original piano score, the octaves are above the thirds, right? Now, what is the big difference between those two? How does it change the harmony so much? The reason because and maybe you've already seen this in other evaluations that I've done. You are changing this chord into a B minor triad and then ending on an E minor triad, right? An octave chord. But that's not what the tonality is, right? By separating the thirds from the octaves in the way that Barvinsky does, he is allowing the harmony to, the harmony of a sixth chord, right? So that the melody notes are like an added sixth. So these are actually D thirds that are the root of a D major chord, and these G thirds are the root of a G major chord, right? And then so like when you enclose them with, like in this case, a sounding B and a sounding E, you end up with minor chords, right? And you sort of take away that kind of floating impressionistic effect, right? And this is just an example of how shifting the registers of certain functions from the original piano score can really alter the musical meaning enormously, right? It can change things from bittersweet to sad. It can change, like you can end up losing your way on like where is the melody and so on, as we've seen in some other evaluations. So like when the middle voice is boosted up to the same level as the melody, then you can't tell which one is which, right? Things like that. Well, you don't have any problems like that, but yeah, so just watch out for that, all right? And then bum bum ba da 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 da. This is all really nice, and you're using the B flat clarinet for the suspension and so on and so forth. The kind of that thing that keeps the harmony grounded while reaching upwards. That's all really nice, nicely done. So this is really really great, and I mean, I just wish that like you had a better sound set. Right, and there's a really cheap one out there, Note Performer, if you haven't heard of it. I don't know if it's compatible, if this is MuseScore, if it's compatible with MuseScore. If this is Dorico, I don't think it is. But if it was, then it is compatible with Dorico and other things. And I think it's just really dirt cheap, and it doesn't have some of those sort of annoying things like when the vibrato is so predictable that it just sounds mechanical. It's kind of going wow 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 wow, right? And like you want to avoid that, right? Because it like sometimes the mock-up can actually be the key to getting the job, right? And like when I first started out, you might notice with some of my earlier commentaries in this series of evaluations and other videos that I have made, I was not scornful of mock-ups, but I was not completely sold on them as being all that important. But in the ensuing years, in the ensuing decade, I have found that more and more non-musically trained people are coming into the field and giving me work, and their participation relies on a good mock-up. In fact, I would say 3 out of the 4 major projects that I've done over the past 2 years absolutely relied on the ability to produce a mock-up that could be used for rehearsal and reference and other purposes like that. By people who weren't trained classically. So, wow, like I'm not saying that you have to obsess over it and get like the absolute perfect mock-up every single time, but just really, like even in a basic way, like something like Note Performer, which is cheap and pretty dependable, and it's an accurate view of what your piece could sound like without being incredibly complex and like there are way more convincing ways to get a mock-up than Note Performer. But all right, so so just think about investing that, because like this, I'm sure that there are some people out there who kind of get it, like how good this score is that you did, despite some of the things I'm going to be pointing out. But there might be some others who are like less impressed or not quite as aware, right? And this would be a way to reach those people as well, just in this particular situation, for instance. But imagine that this were being scored for a dance company, right? and they needed to rehearse along to it before they worked with the orchestra. Just things like that. All right, so and then here we get the combination of piccolo and first clarinet, right? So here we're reaching upwards, and then what happens? Like once you reestablish the position of the octaves, then the context of the harmony becomes impressionist again, right? There's a few little quibbles like repeated notes, especially a repeated dotted rhythm under a slur, right? So like you lose the punchiness, the really nice rhythmic quality, da da da. You miss that that pulse, right? When you just throw a slur over it, because strictly speaking, it's a bit of a contradiction in terms to have repeated notes under a slur, right? I mean, yeah, just try breathing that and singing that, right? It just turns out to be like a kind of sort of mushing together. So, just really think about that. Don't, did you watch my video on 12 common scoring errors? I'm wondering, where I said, like, don't just drop piano style slurring onto wind and string parts, right? Because they kind of like they don't mean that much. We see some of the same problem happening here, but I'll cover it when I get to it. All right, so let's get back to the scoring. All right, but this is really cool the way this is all working, except for slur over the repeated notes. I feel like you completely end up with a shapeless phrase here. Now this isn't so bad because they're notes moving in steps rather than repeating, right? But like repeating the notes, it just da right? Is that what you want? Don't you want da 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 or even da 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 da? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it. All right, and then this is very cool. First oboe coming in here. Right, and then little tenuto on the middle. And working with middle winds, lower winds. I think that's just a really beautiful combination. I love how simple you keep it. I love how you have the little pizzicato down here and then just ending with a little pluck in the double bass, their lowest E. Right, now here's an example of something you don't need, right? Barvinsky had a tied half note because of other reasons, but like just because he had tied dotted half to tied dotted half doesn't mean that makes any sense at all for the voice when it's separated from the piano part. This should be a dotted whole note tied to the next bar. Okay? All right, and then diminuendo to pianissimo. This is great. See, like a lot of people were just using some of the crescendo and diminuendo marks and not really establishing destination dynamics, but you did, and that's really fantastic. But like, what's the dynamic here? Is this pianissimo? What is it? I think you should mark it. If everybody else is pianissimo, there should be pianissimo here. Alrighty, so, now continuing on. This is rather nice in here. I mean, I feel that like the big problem here, okay, is that you have your first flute kind of doing a voice crossing with your first oboe, right? They're kind of out of their natural, or at least the first flute is out of its natural register of brilliance, and it's playing below the oboe. Okay, now I've heard some wind quintet writing like this, with the oboe an octave above the flute and so on. And that would all be good, except for the fact that you have so much weight on all these other parts. Right? You've got the kind of lower tremolo line. This is doubling the flute for the first 4 bars, the first flute. And you've got the other strings around it. You've got the chords over it in the first violins, and you've got all this motion here in your bassoon, first bassoon and first clarinet, and so on. There's a lot of stuff happening, and you've got timpani rolls. And with all that kind of mess of noise, we're not even getting into the harp. With all that noise, with all that pressure, with all that stuff going on, how are we going to be able to hear this flute? Okay, just ask yourself that, Jason. All right. So, basically, you have such great ideas, but and so many people are coming at me with great ideas, great textures, wonderful ways of putting things together, but they're throwing in flute in a low register where nobody will hear it. Right? And I know, see, like you're trying to balance it. You're thinking ahead. You may have heard me complain about this before. You're saying, like, okay, well, oboe is going to be pianissimo. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The wealth of sound around it and everything else is just too great. There's, like if you were to mark this first part mezzo forte and back off on a few of these parts, then I would buy it, right? But as it is now, it is very much overwhelmed. And what's more, you're pairing up the oboe in unison with the piccolo in its softest register as well. And even at this balance, piano for the piccolo and pianissimo for the oboe will have the advantage, right? Now, if you were to double the oboe with the flute and at this pitch, right? So just basically take this up an octave, and then instead of having like a flute family instrument play this, maybe have the second clarinet play this, or you just only 4 bars of stuff, right? So like there's still plenty of time to change to the bass clarinet. You could have your third clarinet player play this. Then that would work great. All right. All right, and this is lovely too. Also, once again, another score that isn't slavishly interpreting exactly the flow of the left hand in terms of like having to always come up from below, and it's just, I really love the freedom right in here. That's really nice, and the way that these parts are working together, really cool. And then changing into middle voice, becoming part of the middle voice. That's exactly what my instincts told me would be needed. But like the thing is, like when you get to right in here, you ease off on the sense of flow, right? And where did it go? It doesn't become unnecessary, right? It's still necessary. Now here you have like divisi con sordini and so on. Like you want muted second violins. My question is, why do the second violins need to play the melody along with the first violins? What if these octaves here are perfectly sufficient for the octave on around it, and then the little harmony in the middle, you just leave off the top note and just have a nice, much clearer, stronger divisi rather than divisi in 3, just divisi in 2, right? And then here you don't even need this note here. You could just have these voices at an octave with the violas and so on. Of course, like by enclosing this, right? By having the enclosure and not being on top of the thirds, once again, it's changing into a B minor chord and ending with an E minor chord. But you are getting you are interpreting this more as like context of G major rather than minor chords, rather than B minor and E minor, by continuing on sort of writing that low D. So you do get a bit of an out there, and also the rolled D in the timpani. I think that this is all very cool, like this pizzicato stuff happening down in here, and then the way that the cellos come in and the double basses roll into this, and you get this little harmonic right in here, very easy for the player to just reach down and reach up actually and hit the node, and yeah, it's all nicely structured. Okay, yeah, so just, aside from that, the way that the melody is treated here, and the way that you have this divisi in 3 here, and the really, really long slurs, it's not bad at all. I would maybe elevate the harp a little bit, right? So, because like you're having the harp play over areas where everybody else is already playing, and what happens is that just everything around it swallows the harp. You can market piano and pianissimo all you like, but unless you write solo on this harp, it's going to get eaten up, right? And what's more, like, why rely on the harp to play all of the figuration, the piano style figuration for you? Why rely on them to take care of that detail? Why not just have more winds and strings involved with that, and that's really smooth kind of a thing. That frees up the harp to, you could play beautiful big gushing chords on this and just get way more volume out of it, rather than imitating these lower string figuration that just kind of gets swallowed into the texture. One last little thing to talk about before I move on. It's just wonderful, just really diverting, digging into your score with you, Jason. I just, you can't take my critiques as, they're not critiques at all. It's feedback. It's not really criticism, right? Because you're doing some great stuff here, but just like, how do we make it better? That's all that my comments are really targeted at. So in a case like this, ties between unmeasured tremolo like this, absolutely that is what you need. But how do you slur in a melodic sense when you have a melody in unmeasured tremolo? How does somebody slur between here and here when the bow is going back and forth furiously? It's going back and forth faster than I can hum it or doodle it on with my mouth, right? So you just have to, you cannot put a slur on melodic motion, okay? A stepwise motion between different unmeasured tremolo pitches. Now, you could do it between fingered tremolo, right? Like if you're going back and forth between this B and this B, just going do, like then you would put a slur over that. But you don't put it over like sequential different notes. You can do a tie, right? But like not a slur. Then also you have to think about, like, once again, the absolute danger, the risk that you put your score at by, just by dropping the piano style slurring onto it, right? At least in a concert situation. I mean, there are some guys, really experienced film music composer guys, who just put a big expression slur over it and they leave it up to the string players to work it out. But you cannot get away with that in concert music. You have to work this out. Down, no slur. Up, slur between here and there. Down, no slur. Up, this one's a perfectly good slur. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that. The bow has to go up and down. What you're asking the player to do here is going down, up, down. Do you see the problem there? And then here, you have two different styles of bowing. It's really important for players, even playing divisi, to have the same, to have the bows work the same way, right? So you got like one long, looks like an up bow here from the way that you've calculated things. And then here you have an up bow and then a down bow. And now they're one group, side by side, you have players going up bow and down bow, right? And they just end up with different emphasis in different ways. It's just creating a mess for the concert master to work their way through. Seriously, cut it way down. Just don't put a slur on this, right? Get rid of this slur. And then just have this beam group slurred, and then no slur going forwards into this bar, right? And then you get a nice firm pulse, da, da, rather than da, da. Where's the downbeat? Nobody's bowing on the downbeat. Do you see the problem? There's no pulse. Da, right? Not da, 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 da is better, da, da, right? And the same thing here, da, why not da, da? We get a nice pulse on the downbeat with the tonguing of the pitch. Right? All right. Okay, so just watch out for some of those things, okay? It's such a cool score. And once again, like some of the earlier contributions to this compilation, I really love the kind of more simple, direct, just letting the basic textures and qualities of tone of the instruments do more of the expressive work, right? I think that works great. And you have like destination dynamics. Your crescendo poco a poco ends up at a mezzo forte, right? You missed one right here, right? Or missed a couple right in here. But yeah, like you've solved a lot of problems that I saw cropping up in other scores. So I mean, it's pretty good. But look, get note performer. Don't drop in, heedlessly. Drop in piano style slurs over winds and strings and brass. And just watch out for some of those other things I talked about, okay? And you immediately improve. Just go over everything that I told you in this, and then run the mock-up again. All right, and then see whether or not I'm right or wrong. But one way or another, I really would like you to contribute to the next orchestration challenge, because I think it's right up your alley. I think you absolutely will have an affinity with the composer we're selecting, and I think that you will end up scoring something really, progressing forwards as you go, as you improve your craft skill set and everything else. Okay, and I really would like to see what you come up with. All right, and that goes for everybody in this compilation, and everybody I've seen so far with all of these evaluations, whether they're Patreon or website entries. Just looking and say, wow, what are they going to do with next year's entries or next year's selection? So yeah, so thanks again, Jason. All right, so we've got 2 more scores to go, so we better go look at the next one. Here it is. Awesome work, Colin. That that really grew on me. The more I listened to this, the more I thought, oh, just such a nice, nice overall concept. Some great scoring, and just a few little problems to fix here and there. But nothing that can't easily be fixed by maybe changing to another instrument and so on. So I know immediately, like, you're probably thinking, like, having listened to some of the earlier evaluations, you're thinking, oh no, some really low flute scoring that'll get buried, and also maybe I should get note performer. So yeah, I definitely think you should get note performer, because it would just make this score come to life, in a way that it kind of isn't right now. It's just more of kind of like an echo, kind of a distant image, a foggy mirror of what the score should look like, right? And kind of very tinny, very grunty kind of sounds. Note performer gives you much richer sounds. Now, I'm not to say that they perfectly sound like an orchestra. I mean, you put an orchestra back to back. If I put an orchestra back to back with one of my mock-ups, one of my orchestral recordings back to back with one of my mock-up recordings, there's just absolutely no question that the orchestra is way richer and way better. But a note performer would do you better, I think. You would hear more of the subtleties, and I think it would guide you in your orchestration efforts better. Not to say that you should use mock-ups as a guide, but definitely you can hear certain balance problems and certain textural layering problems and so on. That can be a guide for that, if not like the actual real sound. Alrighty, so let's get straight to the analysis here. You sort of set a little problem with yourself, right? And the first thing I just have to say is that those horns, I mean, they just sounded really unrealistic. Just really sounded more like kind of DX7 like, or I mean, they didn't have just that real beautiful, warm, but not too dense kind of a sound. Yeah, they just kind of had this weird kind of, it's hard to say, kind of a chorusy sort of a sound. All right. Well, all right. So you've set yourself a trap here. All right. You've got the upper line scored for first flute, and then you have got the harmony below scored in trading off horns, which is a cool idea, but like just absolutely no need for it. Like you could just like these players are capable of playing the entire thing all the way through to here without worrying too much. Like because you've got breaths built right in, right? And they can always sneak a breath. Like the place where a lot of wind and brass players sneak a breath is right before a dotted rhythm, right? They'll go da 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 da. I mean, it's just and like nobody will notice usually, right? It's just almost almost like an automatic thing. But you've actually built the breath right into certain places, right? So like this, you don't really need to trade off between the players at all. In fact, you get a much more even sound if it's just between the first and the second. Okay, well, lecture over. Strange that you have bassoon starting off in treble clef and then going to bass clef, right? It's just weird. I don't know why that is. Okay, but the trap, you've been hanging on my words, wondering where the trap is. The trap is solo viola. All right, with the dynamics that you have marked and the scoring and the positions that you have, what is going to happen is that the weight of the horns and their overtones are going to swamp the solo viola part. That solo viola part would have to really reach out espressivo, like mezzo forte or something, if they were to compete with the horns. And the horns are not the ideal partner for them in making them sound good. Cellos would be better, or other violas, right? Would be a better accompaniment in order to get this viola to sound louder. And here's an interesting thing. I have known an actual couple. It happened to be a married couple that both worked for the same orchestra, and one of them was a trumpet player, and the other one was a viola player. And you would think the gentlest string instrument and the loudest, one of the loudest of the heavy brass instruments would not make a good match, but by golly, they sounded fantastic together. And just like a friend of mine plays trombone, and a lot of it alto trombone, in a duo with a harpist. And some of the things that he plays are his own composition. Some of the things he plays are arrangements of other things, but I swear it works great. But then, but it's just a really intimate sound and they're close together. But I'd say horns and solo viola, it's just, danger Will Robinson, right? I just feel that, especially when the horn reaches up a little. I just feel the horn timbre swallowing the viola, right? So if there was some other, like clarinets wouldn't swallow up the viola, right? That's an example of something that you would have a nice contrast with the sound and yet would not push themselves into it. Or you could have horns and solo cello, right? That would also work great. There's nothing about this line here that a solo cellist could not play. But viola, just doesn't feel safe to me. All right, and then harp here. Do you want these rolled and so on? And I mean, it's all good. It's all fine with me. Sounds like it would work pretty well. And then like the nice little trade-offs here, to oboe, and then flute coming back and going in opposite directions, and this is just really fun in here. I mean, I feel that you are fulfilling my criteria of, of progressing the emotion alongside the timbre, right? And then you're throwing in clarinet here, just kind of, going up to E like this and still playing softly. It's just really a different kind of a thing than like flute going up to that same sounding pitch of D. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it pretty much works. I like the octaves that you've got here in English horn and oboe. I like the fact that you keep everything really fresh by trading off between the two instruments. Solo viola and English horn. The English horn is going to win in that contest, in that combination. I really love the fact that you did not slur over a repeated note, which, it just turned into this thing where every other score is slurring over a repeated note. All right? I think that it's really nice the way that you have done these things. I think you should match up your slurs, though. Right? If you're going to slur like this in your first oboe, and your English horn, you should slur the same way with your violas. And if not, then make, just because the winds can play longer in these smaller fragments, not like long sweeping things, but smaller fragments of melody, and so on, you get much more meaning if the phrasing matches. Okay. And, maybe consider not slurring across the downbeat so much. Seems to me like you're not all that committed to slurring across the downbeat because you leave it out in your solo viola, which is the most important part, right? Being the solo part. And then in other instruments you slur across kind of haphazardly. You've got one here, and then on the same pitches in the horns you've got no slur, right? So I would say just get rid of all the slurs across the downbeat, or get rid of as many as you think are right. It just doesn't really seem to me to add anything when you take all the emphasis off the downbeat, right? Now, that's not true in your score because you are having plenty of instruments articulate the downbeat. This is really nice right in here. It's a bit heavy, with your trombones and octaves, and your you got bass trombone and you got the rolled timpani and so on, but you're making an effort to have nice interplay between registers where the instruments can get nice and soft and work together in a cool way. You can probably change back to bass clef right here, right? A lot of bassoonists do not like to read low on the tenor clef, though they should be able to read all the way down to D at the bottom with no problem. So don't pay too much attention if they're complaining about it. Below the staff, you see it. You'll see that in orchestral scores. I noticed it the other day in some Berlioz. That does not mean that the part will have anything scored below the staff in tenor clef for the bassoon player. And it doesn't mean that all bassoonists don't read below the staff in tenor clef as well. So anyhow, but just try to avoid it. I would say this is going up to an A. It doesn't really hang out. It's really it's more tenorish in the first bassoon, so it's all good, But yeah, trombones, horns, it seems like you sort of increase the weight as you get towards the soft ending. So maybe think about lightening it up a little bit. The timpani's kind of cool. I like the way that it's sort of working together with the tuba and everything. Yeah. So yeah, just a lovely little kind of collage of elements going across here. Now, on the next page, mainly my critique here would be just really how broken up the the slurring is. Like, you know, does it really need to be like only 3 notes or 2 notes per player? Could the players be playing longer stretches of notes? Because like the more you do that, the less smooth it is. And the other thing too is that could it be that like there could be more overlapping, more dovetailing? Like so, like in other words, this D starting off from the same D as the contrabassoon and then slurring upwards, right? But this could all be second bassoon going all the way up to this A, and then this could like then you could throw in the sounding A down here as a written B for your A clarinet, and then do you see what I'm saying? Like you could like just let just one long unbroken chain of notes just dovetailing forwards and playing one off of the other. I think that would be much more effective. And then here you've got we got some interesting notations here on your like you also chose to interpret your melody as artificial harmonics. I mean, it is really a cool idea. And I do have to say that like this low piccolo and this low flute combining with the intended harmonics here and the cellos is fantastic. It's great. The only problem is like balancing with like you still have your viola solo going on, right? So that is, I mean, it's not so bad as working together with your low flutes here, but then like then the violins like underneath them. I just feel it's almost too much weight. You know what I mean? I would want it to be almost tissue paper. I would want this to be like pianissimo, right? This is pianissimo, so this can be pianissimo, right? But you do want to bring this out cantando on your cantando. I mean, it's hard to it's almost goes against this, right? Because like it's saying cantando when you have something that has no possibility of vibrato being played on open strings, right? How does that work? Here you've spelled everything out and you've got your intended pitches, right? And if this were on any instrument higher than cello, I would say it wouldn't quite work. But it will work fine because the length of the string and the resonant body of the cello, and like if you got a nice healthy section of say 10 or 11 cellos, then this will all work great. But just bring down the volume of your violins here, right? Because otherwise they're going to eat away at the at what's audible for the flutes. Okay, however, like as you start to pile on your players here, and even just like you have piano crescendo, piano here, and so on and so forth, you don't really get to louder dynamics till you get to right here. At this point, the second flute part is becoming just inaudible, right? It would be better for this to be taken over by the clarinet from maybe around here or maybe around here, to have one of your clarinet players take it over, right? It's first clarinet. So this could all be second clarinet. And then the first clarinet comes in and starts to play that lower part of the melody an octave below the flute and the piccolo. All right. I mean, it's such a cool calculation. Just one thing that I want you to think about, all right? And, what is the reason why the touch for artificial harmonic is so universal to all the string instruments except for the double basses? The reason why is that it is the most reliable and most sonorous of the possible artificial harmonics that could be used, and you can also vibrato with it, right? So unless it's on an unless it's touch 4 on an open string. So I mean, I've heard such expressive artificial harmonic playing from soloists and chamber players and so on, and even in an orchestral context once or twice. So, all these calculations are just gorgeous and they're very, very fun. I would say the Touch 6 is just not quite as sonorous as you might be hoping. But I mean, it'll still work. But, just imagine how much more reliable and expressive it would be if it were all artificial harmonics. There'll be a slight slide or pause while repositioning. You know what I mean? Just like you could get that. But like here, like if you're having this glassier sound, that works against the whole word cantando, and then you might as well have everybody playing sans nuances, right? Just like really kind of cool and glassy, and maybe this could actually be up an octave and be playing like flute harmonics. Like you get a harmonic on the B and the A, not on the E though. So, yeah. Anyways, I think you might be one quality may be working against another here. Now here with okay, one last comment, and that is, I would say because there may be some question about what you intend here. It's okay to have these little pitches up here, but they're generally not necessary. Even with having things that aren't artificial harmonics, or excuse me, things that aren't unusual harmonic positions. So like this with this touch 4 and so on, it's just really not needed. Okay, so now here you've got you're giving the player the option of like playing an octave higher. I would say parentheses around the mini notes. Okay. All right, and this is all really cool right in here. I would just say that the harp is going to get swallowed up by the weight of everything else that's going on. And it's really kind of scored fairly low for bringing in the heavy brass and everything else. It just will disappear. You're rolling into a mezzo forte. Where's the harp? How's the harp going to be able to compete against that? Yeah, and then of course, like you're bringing in the heavy brass here, and at that point, yeah, low flute, forget it, as I already mentioned. But other than those quibbles, it's pretty nicely scored and really enjoyable. I mean, I'm really enjoying all of these orchestrations, despite me pointing this out or that out. Do you really intend like a ding kind of a roll here, or do you want to roll from the bottom to the top? Right? If there's any way of getting rid of this little thing and then just making this roll line go all the way across, so it's right? Yeah, and then here I just feel you're adding a lot of weight. Right? It's just like da 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 bum all of a sudden, because before you've just been building slowly, and all of a sudden you have all this strength in here, and what's more, you have it in tenuto marks, right? There is a kind of lack of consistency of crescendo markings, right? I mean, here you're saying piano crescendo, and then you have this big gap here. Right, and same thing here, piano crescendo, and then you have this big gap. You cannot count on the players to keep crescendoing. It's better to have just like a little, maybe just like a little hairpin here and here, and then another one there, and just get rid of the crescendo mark, right? And then are these parts going crescendo? Poco a poco crescendo all by, but there aren't any interruptions to the flow of the music. All right, so anyways, just think about some of those picky little things, all right? And thank you so much for entering this this challenge, and please consider jumping in next time. It would just be really awesome to look at your thoughts on our next selection for 2023. All right, well, that leaves just one score left in this compilation, so let's go take a look at it now. That's a lovely score, DR. I just love the way that it's all put together and just these lovely little touches and yeah, just very cool stuff. Now I'm gonna give you some suggestions to help you build on this and avoid some unnecessary things and so on. I think once again we've got another Muse score type of entry with broken bar lines. Really try to I don't know what it is in Muse score. Maybe we could do like a Muse score kind of tutorial about setting up your score, but like just really try not to have broken bar lines. The whatever the bracket is over here, it should generally be the bar line. There's some exceptions, like for instance here you've got a bracket if you want the timpani and the bass drum to be, as both being percussion instruments, if you want them to be joined together by the same bar line. But usually this isn't done. Usually the timpani gets its own bar line, and then the percussion instruments are considered like a different sort of subsection of the percussion. Excuse me, of the percussion section. So, like, in fact, the timpani are almost considered like their own section of the orchestra in some philosophies. So just like this should all be one bar line, and then there should be one bar line across the percussion, across the brass, and this bracket should basically cover this. And then the same thing here. There should be one bar line that matches up with this bracket. Okay. So, just a few little pointers for you. Like, I don't know how this ended up in here. Maybe this is an artifact left over from copy pasting from the or interpreting the music XML file that I had in on the entry page. But you do not need to add up bow and down bow markings. The players will put those in, right? That's their job. It's not your job to put in up bow or down bow markings unless you have a real clear, strong idea of how something should be bowed that wouldn't be normal, right? That wouldn't normally be the pattern of bowing, right? And if you don't know what that is yet, then don't worry about it. The players will work that out for you. Now, I really love the fact that you didn't slur across these repeated notes. There's just been too much dropping of the piano style slurs onto wind and string parts. Okay, however, you do have a slur across this repeated note right in here, right? So what does that mean exactly? Like by slurring across it, you are really kind of deadening the whole pulse there. Da da da, right? You're going da da, right? So we just get almost nothing of the kind of emphasis, the kind of momentum that you get out of a dotted rhythm, right? But like here, it's fine. Like ba da ta 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 ta, right? It's like this is all working great. So just like whatever it is that made you think, oh well, I shouldn't slur here, is the same thing here, right? Maybe you just missed it. That's all right. Okay, so let's look at the scoring now. I just think that this is such a fun score. It's a little slower than the tempo that Barvinsky intended, but it still works really great. We got the violins in octaves. We have viola and cello in playing those thirds, and then here like the cellos continue on with the kind of that suspended tone as the to sort of keep the context of the harmony. Just so great. And then you have these little pushes from the bassoon and the rolls and the harp. It's just so beautifully effective. I would give a destination dynamic here. Like you keep going pianissimo, crescendo, right? So it's like obviously you're intending this to sort of stick out a little bit. So I would say have a crescendo to piano each time, right? Rather than just going piano, crescendo, piano, or pianissimo, crescendo, because it's just a little weird. If you really intended this, then you could just leave out the pianissimo each time, and then the meaning would be clear to the player. But I don't even think you need to do that. And I don't think you need to score this as tied dotted half notes. I think all this needs to be is just a dotted whole note with a crescendo mark under it. But maybe it would be better to go pianissimo, crescendo to piano, just 3 times in a row, okay? Just so that there's some sense of destination of how far we're going. Because if you want it to go all the way up to mezzo piano, then you should write that in too, right? Just to give us a clear idea. I think it works really, really well. Just very simple, minimal harp rolls. It's very effective, and it will work great in this texture. And then just like the little tweedles right here from the piccolo. There's this kind of concern that I've got. I don't know if you have been paying much attention to the pitfalls video and and the criteria that I've been applying and mentioning at the beginning of each of these videos. But I really do worry about this sounding very static. But I think that just by adding these little touches, you're able to get away with scoring it pretty much all in the strings with just like these little touches that create some interest, just in very simple ways. Like see here you got piano crescendo to mezzo forte, piano crescendo to mezzo piano. So I think you really should have a destination dynamic here if you're going to establish one here. Now, do you really want A2 oboes or A2 oboes? Like, do you want those 2 oboes playing exactly at the same time? And here's the reason why. Like, if you have just a single oboe playing, you'll get a beautifully expressive line, incredibly individual, and having wonderful personal character to it, right? But anytime you double with oboe, or bassoon for that matter, you lose some of that individuality of character because it forces the players to play in sync with each other, right? Because if they don't play in sync with each other and they're just kind of wildly interpreting it any way they would individually normally do, then the lines will be at variance with one another, right? So there's a reining in of a level of freedom of emotion. And what that creates, in addition to the doubling of the tone, is a kind of a more trumpet-like sound. Right? So like it's like the opposite. You might think, oh, I'm adding 2 oboes. It's going to be twice as expressive. No, it'll be half as expressive, twice as penetrating perhaps. Not necessarily twice as loud, but it'll have like a kind of a clearer, more cutting sort of a sound. Go listen to some Brahms, like Brahms Third. There's a famous passage or a very well-marked passage. I think it's in the 3rd movement. The 3rd or 4th movement of A2 oboes, right? You just really hear exactly that. You hear like the limitation of expression there. Yeah, and then especially if you're going to have them play a long note with a ritardando and everything else. And just like I mentioned before, if you don't have anything going on that's important in the middle of the bar, then just mark this as a dotted whole note and tie it to there. Just because there were tied dotted half notes in the piano part, the reason why there are tied dotted half notes in the piano part is for the context of the part inside it, right? But since we don't have to worry about that because your player is only able to play one tone at a time and not anything else that was in the piano part, you don't need to have tied dotted half notes. Same thing for your bassoonist, right? This is a little different here with the horn. Now, here you're saying piano, and you're rising up to this G, right? And you're hanging out around G and F sharp and so on. All right, well, these aren't really soft notes up here. They're much more penetrating, right? Like once you get above the staff, I would say anything above E in the horn is hard to perfectly control the same way as the rest of the range because they could actually play softly. It can be a little painful the higher they go, but they can play softly on the horn. But the character and the projection of the note will still be fairly, still be fairly strong, and really reining it down to a really quiet place actually kind of hurts the player a bit. Kind of hurts their embouchure a little bit. So just, be careful. I mean, G and F sharp are really not big asks. They're okay, but it's just you're hanging out there for a long time. And, the idea is that this is all soft playing. So, like, how soft? In order to balance with the other players who are going at mezzo piano and so on? you know, it's going to have to be a little on the soft side. And you don't have any crescendo here in your string parts to balance against the growing, slight growing, but still growing all the same presence of the other wind instruments. But it's cool. The way that you scored it, it's all good. But then there's no diminuendo marked going towards the end of the page, so that's also something to think about. This is all good here, first playing here, third there. This is all fine in terms of dividing up the duties. I don't see any problem with that. I like the little bassoon line going up here and then adding the E. You need to mark which one this is, right? So this would probably be first bassoon, right? And then this comes in, and you don't have to mark it when it's second. That's just it'll be assumed by the conductor. Like you don't have to say +2, right? Which is I'm seeing in some scores. You might want to put a slur over this. Right. Otherwise, I really like this. Very, very cool. All right, now going on to this next page. Now, are you sure that you don't want any slurs over your bassoon line here and your cello? Do you really want it like here? I mean, I can see the whole, pluck, 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 and then that's all great. But and then it goes on and on and on, pluck, 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 pluck. And then here, for the harp, you got this nice kind of slurred, smooth line. So if this is intended to be matching the pointiness of the cello here, then I would mark this staccato, right? And furthermore, I would recommend splitting this up between first and second players, right? Like have the second player come in, and then take it all the way to the middle of the bar, and then dovetail on that note. And as far as this is concerned, I think two repeated notes per bar is enough. Like here you have the choice of playing either the C or the E of the middle voice. I would say go for the E so that you don't end up going D D, right? D D and then D F sharp C C E. Like after a while, just so much repeating of those notes just it just doesn't feel like it's flowing the same way, right? So I think it would be better to slur up to the E and then have the second bassoon play this, first bassoonist take over here, and then slur down from the E, C, E, F sharp, and then you can jump down to and then you could have the second player come in here. There's a bunch of things you could do, but yeah. So if that were slurred, if it's staccato, that you'd still trade off between players. Yeah, and then here, with harp, there's a real danger to what you're doing here. You are matching a bassoon playing separated notes, I'm assuming, staccato ideally to match with the cellos. In fact, there isn't pizzicato articulation. Like if you talk about pizzicato articulation to the bassoonist, a lot of them will understand what you mean immediately. That means matching the same shortness of articulation that a pizzicato note has on the bassoon, right? So they'll, it's a different thing from just a standard staccato, rather than just having, going short, 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 short. The bassoonist might be going more like doink, 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 just to really match the, the extreme shortness and kind of bounce that there is in especially cellos and double basses. All right, but what is the danger here? I'm getting distracted. The danger here is that what you are kind of playing along with in the harp will just get swallowed up by pizzicato. Pizzicato, I mean, it's not so much here. This isn't so much of a danger. You've got other instruments playing along, and it's a different vibe, Although, can the harp, here you've got all four bassoons, right? You've got all four of your bassoon players, you have all four horns. You have all four of your horn players playing the same exact thing as the harp. Who do you think is going to win this fight? The horns. Hands down, they'll easily outplay the harp, and you won't hear this harp at all. Maybe take the harp up an octave or two. All right, and here the harp will suddenly come into its own. You'll be able to hear it, and you can hear that on the mock-up, right? However, okay, this line right in here, with all this pizzicato coming from the cellos, perhaps staccato in the bassoons. It's all just going to eat up everything that the harp is doing here. If the harp were to play this an octave higher, no problem hearing it. But where it is, but I mean, even an octave higher in the harp, you've got just this mass of tone right in here with the horns and the trumpets and trombones that will also swallow what you're doing here with your harp. And it'll also swallow what you're doing here with your low flutes. Okay, so now how many people are entering this? How many people are entering this challenge who have not heard me say over and over and over again to not score low flute in a loud tutti? That it cannot be heard. It doesn't have the strength to contribute to the texture, and it's kind of a waste of time for the player. And there are so many instances where that is done. And the flutes could have easily been playing doubled at the top, A2 at the top, where there's no support in this case, right? Like you're spreading out your part across 3 octaves. It's a beautiful idea if it weren't for all the other things that are happening here. And then you have so much weight in your middle voices here. You've got, B flat trumpet, you got trombone, you've got your clarinets, you've got some violas right in there, right? And how much weight is being played on the melody? Well, you've got your low flute right in here, which can't be heard by anybody because your texture's too thick. Then you've got your second flute, which has the first flute is the low flute. You've got your higher flute, the first flute, which it can be heard, but is very weak compared to everything else. And there's nothing doubling it. There are no high strings doubling it. There's no trumpet doubling it. There's nothing doubling it, right? So then you've got the piccolo playing above. The piccolo has the biggest chance of being heard of all. I love this idea in here, like but this could have been given to just the second violins, just both parts divisi on the second violins, and then that would free up the first violin to double the flute here, and then take this low flute and make it A2 or A2 if you prefer, and then free up some of this really heavy-duty middle voice stuff and just give this part right in here, give it to one of your clarinetists or one of your oboe players, and then you've got a balance. But please, I mean, it just seems to me like I'm repeating this over and over and over again. Please stop scoring low flute parts in places where everybody else will just blast it out of the water, right? Low flute parts, like the first octave of the flute, is so delicate. It's like one of the most delicate sounds in the entire orchestra, right? There are a bunch of people pounding spikes into a railroad here, and you are throwing a piece of tissue paper, which is the second flute, into the wind right in front of them, right? So all you hear is the big clanking of the, you'll hear the clanking of the railroad spikes going into the railroad ties, but you won't hear that beautiful piece of tissue paper just landing on the ground, right? Seriously, people, stop scoring second flute like this in big parts. It's a zero-sum game. You are, like, so many of you have so much talent, so much promise, building colors like this so beautifully, right? Just wonderful. And okay, and then you throw me this second flute part, right? So it's just, look, honor your own greatness, the own wonderful part of you that is so creative, right? Add this to your box of tricks. I want to stop seeing this in future, especially in the next one is where the low flute almost never occurs in the natural style of the composer that we are going to be scoring. Please knock it off with the low flute scoring, okay? When you don't have the appropriate kind of accompaniment for it. It's almost like niente. Like, low flute is like niente, right? Like, why put niente in a score? Fading off into nothing, fading from nothing, playing at almost nothing. Why put it into a score when there's all this noisy stuff going on where nobody can notice it? The whole purpose of niente is to force the audience to listen down to a very, very fine point and to notice the absolute subtleties. Guess what? So is the first octave of the flute and the first octave of the piccolo. That is its purpose, is is focusing around the softness, the potential for the incredible delicacy, right? And there's a lot of stuff in here that starts off really beautifully delicately. I really love what you're doing here. I think I said it before, but I'll say it again. And I think that this harp part could be rewritten to be much higher so that the horns are not interfering, and you do not need 4 horns playing this. Right? And then you're going all the way up to A here, a piano crescendo. What dynamic are we here? If it's mezzo forte, then this A is fine. But this A is going to ring out. Right? It's going to be so bright, especially, in conjunction with the B flat trumpet part, right? Yeah. And here you say triple P crescendo, and you have this kind of tenor register trombone playing. It's sort of possible. Not necessarily native. Right? It's like, you already have your clarinets on this and your trumpets. You kind of don't need the help. Not yet. Yeah. I really love the timpani scoring in here as well. That is just wonderful. Just way of getting everything moving, right? So nice. But how long do you want to keep the pizzicato going? Do you want to start smoothing things out when you get to here? Maybe go to arco? Yeah. So, with those caveats, a really great score. Sorry, I don't mean to give you a big lecture on low flute. I'm running into it over and over and again, and I think I'm just gonna have to do an entire video saying stop scoring low flute in a tutti, in a big tutti. And this is not to say that this mistake is only made by developing orchestrators. There is a passage of a piece by Rimsky-Korsakov that he actually uses as an example of how to score for alto flute. And, he's got the alto flute starting in its lowest register and playing across, a fairly complicated texture. And I'll tell you something, that is not going to come through the way that he has scored it, right? Anyway, there are ways of pushing the lowest register of the flute, but then it kind of stops being a concert sound, right? It stops having the kind of character that you need in this situation. Anyway, I really love your score, man. In case that hadn't come through, I really think it's very cool. Like I said, it's sort of growing on me, kind of like the last one, and yeah, this entire compilation is just so awesome. I just really love the kind of generally simpler approach, kind of really effectively bringing out the colors of the instruments in ways that let the instruments have a lot of the emotional meaning, rather than the sort of subtleties and the combinations, the treatment of the line and the nuances and everything else. I think that it's very effective scoring. And then we have right in the middle of it, we have George's just phantasmagorical, the Rebellion kind of you could just get lost in the vastness of that scoring as well. So yeah, just kind of a wonderful collection, and it's these compilations just end up the way that they end up. I don't bunch together people with similar approaches. I just put everybody in exactly the order that they submitted. So which I think is just the fairest, and it keeps things nicely jumbled, right? Rather than being too much, having one compilation with too much of the same kind of a sound. But one way or another, all of the contributors to this made me very excited about the entire thing, and really, just going through this, it just gives me so much hope for the future of orchestration, really. Somebody posed a question about are there good orchestration apps, and I responded that the only app that that is worth putting money into, worth investing in, is your own mind, right? In terms of an app that could actually orchestrate for you, right? Because this is a human thing. It's a human impulse. It's a desire. It's a need to create a painting in sound, right? And like, yeah, you could have an app that does everything for you, but I mean, what's the fun of that? I mean, like, why bother writing a book if you just haven't, if you just tell your app, listen, I want a gumshoe detective kind of a thing in the Mickey Spillane style, and here's the plot, go write it, and it comes back with all the stuff that you'd never intended and doesn't really sound like you, it sounds like the app. It's the same thing with no matter how much you try to program your own style into a computer, it is always going to sound like, it is always going to sound like it more than you, right? Just really just pursue your own. You do not need. There's certain things you do not need help for. It's almost like saying, hey, there's an app that will like make love for you. You know, like how much. Well, that machine is over there having lots of fun. Well, like what's the point? Like, you don't need an app to orchestrate for you. Okay, you just need your brain, and I'm seeing so many so many great imaginations at play here. I'm just so happy with all of you, and I'm just so happy to be getting getting everything from exploratory kinds of works to very simple stripped down works to hugely expanded works to works that like turn Barvinsky upside down for an experiment and to see whether or not it works. I'm really loving every moment of it. So just keep them coming. That's all I can say. Keep them coming, and I hope to see you all, everybody in this compilation next year. All right? Really happy and so proud of all of you. So I will see you in the next video coming very soon. They're pretty much going to start piling on as we get towards the end of the year. Okay? Including this one. All right? Thank you all so very, very much.